Through its eavesdropping programs, the government hopes to identify people who are actively planning terrorist attacks. But the government has also been targeting those it sees as potential terrorists and bringing criminal prosecutions against them. In Florida, California, and New York, the FBI has conducted sting operations in which undercover informants pretend to be supporters of terrorism and offer the targets of the investigations opportunities to break the law. These sting operations, some critics say, risk depriving people of liberty with little or no gain in security.
If you start to go after people who you say, you know, we think we could make you a criminal, then you begin to use the Justice Department system and the justice system in a way that is certainly perverted from what you would think of as at its actual philosophical basis and its legal intentions. It is one thing to say, look, you've been trucking in drugs, we're going to finally nail you. And another thing to say, look, you could someday be a criminal, and we're going to see just how far we could take you in this little journey.
But many in the government say that 9/11 has taught us we can no longer afford to gamble.
September 11th established very clearly in the minds of the Department of Justice an overriding sense of prevention. This horrific thing had occurred in America, and one thing was certainly true, and that is we can't let it happen again.
The FBI conducted one of the sting operations in the city of Albany, New York. The case points up the debate over the value of these kinds of operations. In October 2006, 2 Muslim men here were convicted of money laundering and material support of terrorism in connection with a plot that was entirely fictitious. Mohammed Hossein was the owner of a local pizzeria. He was a naturalized U.S. citizen from Bangladesh who had lived in Albany for 20 years. His co-defendant, Yassin Aref, was the imam of a local mosque. He was a refugee from the Kurdish region of Iraq who'd been living in Albany since 1999.
I think the Aref case was a tremendous case. It serves our long-term goal of prevention and preemption of people that may be involved in terrorist attacks. So I think the convictions were a great success.
But here in Albany, the case has spurred protests. Neither man had any criminal record, and no evidence was presented during their trial that either one was actively involved in terrorism. Yet each of them was sentenced to 15 years in prison.
What's striking to me is that they took a man they knew was innocent, and they aggressively sought to and succeeded in ruining his life.
The FBI launched the sting operation after receiving evidence that it believed linked the imam Yassin Aref with an Iraq-based terrorist group. The information came from this devastated camp in Iraq. The government said it was a terrorist camp. Soldiers found an address book here that contained Aref's name and his Albany address. And the military found his name in what it said was a terrorist safe house and another terrorist camp. The FBI would also learn that Aref, as a student in Damascus, Syria in the early 1990s, had met a Kurdish political leader named Mullah Krekar. A few years later, after Aref was already in the U.S., Krekar founded a terrorist organization called Ansar al-Islam.
We had information that he also was preaching jihad and anti-American sermons, basically. So based on that information, we started to look at him.
They wanted a terrorist to prosecute. It was like they were on a scavenger hunt, and the next thing on their list was a terrorist, and damn it, they found one. And if he didn't quite fit the bill, that was okay. They just twist things up a little bit to make him into a terrorist.
By many accounts, Aref is a brilliant man, a highly educated religious scholar and poet who speaks several languages. In the 1990s, he fled the violence of the Kurdish region and lived for several years in Damascus as an official United Nations refugee. In 1999, the UN relocated him to America, to Albany, where a year later he was asked to become the imam of a local mosque. The president of the mosque is Shamshad Ahmad, who teaches physics at the State University in Albany.
I know Yasin Arif very well. I am the person who was in touch with him almost on daily basis. He was critical of President Bush's policies, and he talked about the suffering of the Palestinian people. But never ever I heard any kind of a statement that he supported terrorism or sympathized terrorism or he was against the United States.
But the FBI believed the evidence against Aref could not be ignored. So it devised a sting operation. Its initial target, though, was not Aref, but a man whom even the FBI did not think had any link to terrorism, the pizza shop owner, Mohammed Hussein. He was an active member of the Masjid, as-Salam Mosque. Yasin Aref was his imam.
The FBI targeted Mohammed Hussein, we believed, because they wanted to get Aref, because Mohammed Hussein prayed in the same mosque behind Aref, and that he could guide them or lead them to Aref.
One of Hussein's many defenders in Albany is a longtime customer of his who works for the State Attorney General's office, Joseph Kachaya.
I've known Mohammed for about 13 years. Mohammed never had said a bad thing about the United States in the numerous talks we've had. He thought the world of this country, and Mohammed would never harm this country. In fact, we had some arguments, and Mohammed was taking more of the pro-American side than I was.
The father of 6 children, Hussein tried to boost his income by buying rundown buildings and improving them to be rental properties.
Mohammed Hussein's life was get up in the morning, make pizzas, take his kids to school, come back, make and deliver pizzas, work on his houses, and go to bed. And that was his life.
This thing went through Mohammed Hussein, and a lot of people don't understand what a pizza shop owner with 20 years in this country, other than the fact that he was Muslim, what other criteria were there to target him?
Quite simply, with the assets that were available to the FBI at the time, they could not get to Aref directly. It would have aroused suspicion. However, the informant did have a prior, I'll call it, minimal relationship with Hussein, and it was a way to get in.
In the summer of 2003, in this building on the outskirts of Albany, the FBI began the sting operation.
It was not a real case. It was a fabricated case. It was a planned, like a fiction, like a novelist plans and then writes the whole plots.
At its center was a man known in FBI parlance as the cooperating witness, a Pakistani immigrant named Shahed Hussein, who is known as Malik. The owner of a small business, he had been convicted in 2002 of taking money from other immigrants and illegally helping them to get driver's licenses. In hopes of reducing his sentence, Malik agreed to work for the FBI as an undercover informant. Malik was already acquainted with Mohammed Hussein, and one day, with the FBI's videotape rolling, offered him an attractive deal. Malik told Hussein he had lots of cash and wanted to help him as a fellow Muslim. He offered to loan Hussein $50,000 and, as an act of Muslim charity, would only require that $45,000 be paid back. But there was another dimension to the deal, one that would form the cornerstone of the government's case. One day, Malik showed Mohammed Hussein a shoulder-fired missile.
Malik now takes a tarp off an area and opens up a crate. You can see Mohammed is looking at it. And Malik is telling Mohammed, do you know what this is?
At later meetings, Malik spoke of a Pakistani group fighting in Kashmir called JEM, which is on the U.S. government's list of terrorist organizations. This moment would be the turning point in the life of Mohammed Hussein. even though the missile was just an FBI prop and the plot was a fake, the government would contend Hussein believed it was real. So under the law, his willingness to take cash from Malik and write him checks in return could be construed as money laundering and as material support of terrorism.
Well, for law enforcement, obviously, it's a great moment because he was obviously voluntarily and knowingly going along with this and laundering and assisting in it by laundering the proceeds of the transaction.
Why did Mohammed Hussein, even after seeing the missile, keep doing business with Malik? His lawyer says the pizza shop owner had no idea that continuing with the loan deal could get him prosecuted as a supporter of terrorism.
Malik is a big shot. Mohammed's a little guy. Mohammed is a pizza maker. Who's Mohammed Hussein, a pizza maker, to question Malik's manner of making a living?
Hussein was a businessman.
He was a businessman, yes.
And ambitious.
Ambitious, no doubt. And desperate, because he had bought some apartments and he wanted to fix them up fast so that he can rent and get money.
Hussein agreed to the deal on the condition that the transactions be recorded in writing by a witness.
Every Muslim is instructed that when you loan money, it must be written so that there should be no misunderstanding and problem later on or so. So everything seemed to be very natural.
The witness Hussein proposed was his imam, Yassin Aref. Now the FBI's principal target would get an opportunity to play a role in its plot and his own chance to violate the money laundering laws.
There was no question it was a test. And these individuals failed that test dramatically.
From January through June 2004, the men met on numerous occasions. Mohammed Hussein received about $40,000 in cash. He wrote $27,000 worth of checks to Malik. Yassin Aref witnessed the transactions.
They will give me $45,000.
In the early morning hours of August 5, 2004, Yassin Aref and Mohammed Hussein were arrested. During the trial, the government called a witness, Qasim Shar, who was a member of Aref's mosque. Shar testified that he'd heard Malik, in the presence of both defendants, talk about a missile attack that would take place in New York City. But Shar also said he was surprised Malik would say this in his presence, since they had never met before. He testified he thought Malik had been joking.
Aref heard Malik say a lot of crazy things. I don't think he ever placed any stock in them whatsoever.
The government also charged Aref with lying to the FBI because he had told an agent he didn't know the Kurdish terrorist Mullah Krekar. The jury deliberated for 4 days. It convicted Aref of lying to the FBI and convicted both men of multiple counts of money laundering and material support of terrorism. This juror agreed to be interviewed on the condition his identity be concealed to protect his privacy.
Well, I think money laundering is fairly clearly defined on what it is and what it isn't. And when I look at the evidence that was presented and the process we followed, I'm confident that we came to the right verdict. And it was not our duty to determine whether or not the government had good reason.
At the post-sentencing press conference, federal officials reminded everyone that Yassin Aref had had contacts with radical Islamists. But had he posed a danger to Americans?
Well, again, you say, was he a terrorist? I think he had that ideology. I think he expressed the ideology that he supported Islamic causes, fundamentalist Islamic causes. He supported groups that would engage in terrorism. Did he actually himself engage in terrorist acts? Well, we didn't have any evidence of that.
And what about Mohammed Hussein? Had he posed a threat to Americans?
Anytime Malik brought up any topic related to Osama bin Laden or Al-Qaeda or terrorism, Mohammed Hussein shot it down. And he did it strongly, he did it aggressively, and he reminded Malik that this was his country.
I am one of the best citizens in this country. I am teaching my children behave. I am a businessman. I am a house owner. I have nothing to do with anything else. And this is my country.
If we begin to use stings as a way of preempting and preventing terror, those are manufactured fictional cases that we have been developing in order to find potential terrorists. The problem is that there are real terrorists. And if you focus on the potential terrorists, you're going to use your resources the wrong way.
I would rather not be here after they were involved in an attack and try to explain to the public how I knew their associations, I knew these contacts, I knew what they lied about, and yet a lot of Americans had been killed because the FBI failed to act.
In post-9/11 America, the debate over security and liberty, as it did during the Cold War, stems from differing perceptions of the danger posed by the enemy and of the protective benefits of government intrusion into private lives. But the future is always hard to predict, and so is the ultimate outcome of America's battle over security and liberty.
If there's another successful attack of the same scale as 9/11 or that goes beyond, I think a lot of the discussions we're having, a lot of the efforts to carefully calibrate civil liberties for security are going to go out the window. So I think the American people will demand that the government really do more.
I do think that the threat of terrorism is with us for the rest of our lives. And so the kinds of changes that we are debating are not temporary measures. And that simply raises the stakes. I think we are debating about what kind of society we want to live in and what kind of society we want our children to live in and our grandchildren to live in the years to come.